This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial. And it's a mixed bag today. I want to remind you that we're having a trail coming through from Bloomington to Mansfield. If you are doing rail trails, you'd like it to come through to Champaign. Not likely, because there's a active grain line comes from Cargill's through to Mansfield, where it meets another Norfolk-Southern line. So you finish out in the boondocks with Mansfield. It's probably about 5 or so miles from Mohammed. If you like, that corridor is the 150 parallels the rail bed that was abandoned. It's being administered from the Bloomington end, so you don't hear too much about it. And we don't always go over to Farmer City or Mansfield, but these are actually bedroom communities to Champaign-Urbana. So quite a few people that live there working in Champaign-Urbana. So I want you to know where it is, because you really would like to get from Bloomington to Champaign-Urbana, and we have to figure on a different route, because 150 is a little busy. It's okay. It's a lot of the traffic has been put on 74, so it's a highway that is not really a highway anymore. There's still a fair bit of traffic on it. I couldn't say that I'd like to have someone hiking along it, but you could, and I'm not sure that there'd be any possibility of having a shared corridor. If you're on a bicycle and you're used to riding, then you can follow 150 through, right through Champaign-Urbana to Urbana. The Norfolk Southern line has a yard in Urbana, and that connects to the Kickapoo Trail. The outcome is that we need a way of getting from Mansfield into Champaign without being killed on 150. So I'm suggesting that Route 2 goes out of Mansfield, goes straight south to Route 10, and you can jog a little bit on Route 10. Again, Route 10 is a busy road, and it's a narrow road, so you go a little bit past Hickory Hill and over 72, and or you don't even have to go over 72. You can take a road to the second road to the right as you come from the road that comes through from Mansfield to 10. You take the second road and it takes you over to old Route 47 and into Whiteheath. I might run through that again, because I'd like you to be out there looking at this thing and checking it out. If you're going to go bicycle riding, take a ride in that direction. Go to Mansfield and you'll find a road that goes straight south to Monticello. It's labeled Route 2, and then when you get to Road 10, you take a little jog and go over to Whiteheath. You can either go right and go down the road to Shady Rest and meet up with an intended railroad bed that we have from Clinton into Whiteheath. But this is in the category of dreaming. I've been writing details about skeletons that we have. So the skeletons aren't all complete, and it certainly won't be complete in my lifetime or any others. So we're leaving this incompletion to future generations. And so at Whiteheath you have a railroad Y where you could, if you were sitting there with the train, you can go to Monticello and Decatur, or to Champaign, or to Clinton. So these railroad beds exist, and they can be interim trails while we're re-railing one of them into Champaign, but they're incomplete, and we're debating with railroad people as to whether they can do a shared railroad. We can do shared vehicles on a road, but a shared railroad doesn't seem to click yet. That's partially because railroaders that are moving at 80 mile an hour and have two tracks, and one track is hidden by parked vehicles, then you don't see them, and it's dangerous, and you get killed. So, but if you have a 1 mile down to Shady Rest, then it could be a novelty way of getting down there. The Railroad Museum is connected there with continuity, and I'm not necessarily speaking for the Railroad Museum, but they would. There's interest in taking a train down to Shady Rest, and it is a 30-acre horse-era picnic ground where you got together. And you know, a horse and sulky can take you 15 miles, but that's getting to be a bit much for a horse. So it was close enough to towns that, and on the banks of the Sangamon River, and it's kind of attractive. And if you've got a national level railroad museum, then you need some of these sorts of additional pieces of novelty, perhaps, but they're real history. That little trip of 1 mile could be extended by another 3 miles, and take another trail down to Monticello, and you'd have a circuit of about 20 miles. So that's another dream that's sitting in the bushes waiting for someone to do something about it. Might take a while. The economy has changed, the virus has changed it, and climate change will change some of the species and the like, but we try, and I want you to try. I want you to be out there seeing what your resources are. It's not easy to find them, even though we have an east-west, north-south Platte, Jeffersonian Platte. You would think you could, you know your way around, but you can easily get lost in square plats. So take a map with you, take your GIS, and start at Mansfield and see how you can even more than that. Go towards Bloomington and figure out what's going on here. The rail has been removed, the ties have been removed. There may be still some pile of broken tiles on the right-of-way. I suspect the right-of-way is about 100 feet. If not, it's at least 69 feet. Those are usual measurements for cross-section of a railroad. And you'll find that from Mansfield to Alabama City, there is good prairie on the right-of-way. We have this neatness syndrome, and often it is mown. And it's mown just as things get to be interesting. So walk a little of this trackage and figure out what you might do with it. You might want to suggest that farmers don't encroach from the side. It's very tempting to get a few more feet of corn and soybeans. But farmers have been pretty good as far as I'm concerned. They have left our railroads mostly intact, and they've been very good. And part of it is real. They need the gene pool as well as other people. So the prairie that's there on either side of that railroad is important. If you get money, the money might be coming from the Rail Banking Act, because this bed is contiguous and it could go back to rail if necessary. And the Rail Banking Act uses bicycles and hikers to save the right-of-way. So presuming that we have a Rail Banking Act, it may bring in $8, $10, $12 million to restore this bed to an interim trail. I'm not certain about that, but both parties are interested in this, and so the rail trail movement has done very well, and they have in the vicinity of 30,000 miles of railroad right-of-way trails. So there's money involved. And when you have money like that, you also have state money involved. And you have state regulations. One of them is EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the dictates that go with that are that the bed, presumably this has been there 100 years or whatever, it has some creosote in it, so it needs to be capped with about 8 inches of gravel. But that spills down on the sides and take out your prairie. When the state has saved something like 0.01% of the prairie, that's kind of criminal. And there should be some compromise here. So it needs some of us to be talking to planners and administrators to see that that trail is not made wide by APA dictates. The other one is ADA. ADA is the American Disabilities Act, and the wheelchair people just love to have a very wide trail. We have to think about our advocacy for prairie. If there's very little of our heritage gene pool left, we have to think about balancing the recreational opportunities with the preservation aspects of things. Go back to the piece between Mansfield and Farmer City. You can look at it on the internet. You can get a satellite feed and you can go down and look at it. It's got prairie adjacent to the road, which is kind of nice. At least you get to see what your native heritage looks like. But since we invented a rotary mower and big tractors to run them, there's growing to be a neatness syndrome, which we have to do battle with if we're going to preserve the dignity of that railbed. There's also volunteer mowing that happens at the wrong time of the year. If you mow right now, you're going to mow the yellow cornflowers, the purple cornflowers, the dock and the compass plant and the quinine and the rosinweed and the lead plant and all those creatures that we really want to say biodiversity. So there should be some advocacy here, and I'm hoping some of you out there are into this, to talk to the people who are designing it, and maybe Farnsworth Company, which does a lot of designing of the rail trails. So we just waddle along, and when you get to Farmer City, you've got to cross a north-south railroad, but a little bit there is also on the west side of Farmer City. But then the railroad turns away from the road, and you can no longer visit from the 150 road, but you can visit it from the satellite feed. You can also, if you behave yourself, walk along the corridor, or even ride a bicycle along the corridor, because the bed has been firmed by vehicles that pick up the rails. And so at this time, you can probably ride your bicycle along and inspect the corridor, and perhaps communicate with Bloomington to see who is doing this. And I've forgotten at the moment just who I connect with, but it's easy enough to find out the seat of power and suggest that this be a narrow trail with some of the native vegetation on either side. There are trees, sometimes too many trees, and the prairie didn't have a lot of trees. The trees arrived when there was drainage. So having looked at that piece from Mansfield to Bloomington to see where it will come into East Bloomington, how it will connect with the Constitution Trail that goes through Bloomington, just spend a day wandering around if you're in a car or biking or even hiking pieces. Now to come back to Mansfield, and I want to repeat, take Route 2 down to almost to Whiteheath, jog a little on Route 10 to Hickory Hill, a sort of rural subdivision, and then take the 2nd Street to the right, and it'll take you over 72 to old Route 47, and then you have ways of getting into Champaign. We usually come down Kirby Avenue, because that's a little easier on the soul than Route 10, which takes a lot of garbage trucks, and you can end up having a truck pass you within about 3 inches of your bicycle. So take Route Kirby Avenue. If you want to go to Monticello, that Route 45 goes through, waddles around and goes down 105 past the Railroad Museum. That connection would allow Bloomington to connect with Monticello and with Champaign, and Champaign in turn with the Kickapoo Trail. We're looking at the areas that don't get looked at a lot. This is regional planning. This is where you go beyond your neck of the woods, your little village, or wherever you are, your street, or your downtown Champaign. Get out there and if nothing else, look at your maps and charts and figure how you would get to connect Mansfield to Champaign without losing your life. We need the exercise, we need the ambulance, we need, so out there and see if the cauliflowers are being lawn or whatever. But that's enough for the Bloomington corridor. We've said it before, and we'll probably say it a lot again, because we really want you out there having a look at it. It's much better to be out there and looking, and park your car at the section road or wherever you are, and get your bearings straight and figure what you're sure right what to do with this corridor. Now, I went to Lake Park, and I was very pleased with Lake Park. It's a little 2.5 acre prairie. It's on a drainage ditch, which is a cutoff for a meander, and the meander was blocked and made into a lake. So that's a Lake Park subdivision with 74 houses, more or less facing the lake. The ditch is a tributary, and it goes into the Ombra and then runs in front of the Yankee Ridge moraine. With up there with the Barnhart Prairie and a nice sequence. So I walked around. Fun sculpted pieces appeared in the prairie, which adds a little fun to the things. And the sculpted piece is a man, and I see that it now has a mask on it, on its face. So there's people looking at this statue. But the dock and the compass plant is doing very well. All the silphiums, the rosin weed. There's even some cup plant. We're a little wary of cup plant. It can be weedy, and it can give you an acre of tall plants if you encourage it too much. There's a yellow cornflower activity there. There's the purple cornflower. Not very many of them, but they're there. Echinacea, good for your health. And so there's a lead plant, and it's a spawn off from the lead plant we had on the prairie here. It's a shrub lead plant. And so you don't get a lot of these things, but it's biodiverse enough that it's interesting. The winged sunflowers are already flowering. The biodiversity is getting rich, and so if you watch that in June and July, Lake Park doesn't mind you using it. They don't like you to pick it. So the season of things like hyacinths have already gone by, and the starry-eyed grass has gone by. So now we're in compass plants and compositing, and they're doing well. It's a prairie on a cornfield, so it's not pure original. It's a reconstruction prairie, a little bit like Meadowbrook Park, and it's surrounded by housing developments, Winfield Village and others, and they use it regularly for exercise, for ambiance, and not necessarily a lot of enthusiasm about prairie, but that's what it is. So again, we're encouraging you. There's ironweed. It hasn't come to flower yet. It comes a little later. And there's Culver's root. It's just nice to be there. Fairly simple. Round on 45. Oh, before we leave Lake Park, there is a big patch of Canada thistle, and it's purple at the moment, and it's very beautiful. But if you wait till August, it will be all fluffy parachutes that will fly everywhere. I really would like some volunteers to help me at least pick this season's seed off. You won't stop the Canada thistle from growing. It has underground rhizomes that spread. So it's one of these things where you have to watch it for years, and you may even have to use herbicide because there's almost no other way. If you break it up with a shovel, you increase the pieces, and it seems to enjoy it. It's a weed, it's universal. It's a European weed, so it's an alien, and it comes with hay and crops that were brought in to provide an early spring pick for cattle. So I am after some volunteers, even if it's only an hour or two. It is very helpful because that miserable weed will extend. There are also blackberries that are growing, and it's very hard to create a 2.5 acre prairie with the aid of the owner of the land, Dick Burwash, and others. He's long since passed now, but he was interested in the prairie. His father, the family had a house over there on 45 opposite the railroad line, and his father used to photograph the prairie plants. And so Dick has been very helpful in establishing that 2.5 acres. So is Engelbrecht Whittingans, who put the sculpted piece there, and they've helped to save that 2.5 acres from possible mowing or development. And they have a mound of very good topsoil that builders don't like to build on, so they have this unique mound that you can walk along and look down upon the prairie. So I need some volunteers there. My phone number, in case you're listening, is 217-840-1911. Then we go around the corner to Route 45, where we have a rather nice prairie. It's 1 mile long between Curtis Road and Windsor Road. And bless me, I go past, and I'm watching it because I see, the last few years I've seen a little bit of teasel, but I see more of it now. So once again, I'm looking for volunteers to cut that teasel before it gets to be seeding and causing a mess. It has a huge rosette that takes out the prairie underneath. That prairie was originally, the road was a highway, but it was only 2 lanes wide. Now, then it got to be 3 lanes wide, then it got to be 5 lanes wide. So the area of the prairie has reduced, but it's still important because it's a visible prairie. Give it another week or two and the yellow cornflowers and the mint, bebop, and other plants will be in flower, and then there will be the actress, and these are plants that were there. They're not necessarily being planted there. There's a lot of originality to that little piece that's left. If you're in a car and waiting in to get the football game, it's nice to be able to look at something that is natural. It's part being preserved by power lines, and it's very doubtful if that corridor will ever be a corridor of strip mall. So the prairie will be there, and once again, we want you to think about keeping it. Young people, especially, you have to realize that you have very little resources left. It's been used and used and used, and there's very little left, and we have it there. Go around the corner again, and we have an extension of Windsor Road. Windsor Road used to only come through from Urbana to First Street, and that was extended. So it goes now under the railroad line and comes out at first at Route 45, or if it's in Champaign, it's South Neil. If it's in Savoy, it's Dunlap. There's a sign. It used to be at right angles to the traffic, which is fairly serious. The traffic could see the sign. Somehow the sign got made parallel to the road, and nobody sees that sign. So, but the sign is covered with bushes, and it needs some volunteer help also. We sometimes burn these corridors because they need it. The prairie was used to being struck by lightning, and then when there's an accumulation of litter, you can burn. It would burn spontaneously. And native people would take use of that. They'd make an area so when the burning burned, it would force the livestock out, and they could capture animals as they came out the neck of the burn. But they knew that burning improves the prairie. It lets light and heat into the plant early in the season, and it encourages the growth of the prairie. If you don't burn the prairie, it gradually gets weaker and weaker. So you might want to think about that, and perhaps sometime we'll work with this fire department to burn if we can get permits from the various chase zones, including the railroad. It's very hard to deal with getting the railroad to help us out with that burn. So simulation is possible with mowing, but it's not very helpful to have mowing that is with a 15-foot bush hog, which takes out a lot of the prairie. Usually you only need a little bit of mowing alongside the road, and therein we differ some from the Department of Transportation, which is attuned to neatness and tidiness and mowing back the corridor. On 45, there's an 8-foot section of tarmac which is not used. So there's runoff space, and the area down to the ditch is mainly in grasses that can be controlled, and then the little piece between the road, the ditch and the railroad line is there for natural history. And unfortunately, it's narrow enough we don't have a trail through it, so you have to park in a place which is about 300 feet south of Windsor Road. You go in, there's near a sign, and you can park there and walk through the prairie. You'd be advised to have boots that have toe, like Wellington boots, because there are ticks and they don't find their way up boots easily. And when you get home, you can check yourself out, or have someone check yourself out and take a shower. So that's enough about those. That's a triumvirate of 3 different prairies that are kind of interesting, and they're doing very well, and you need to know about it. And Bill Smith called me up, and Bill Smith has been on the Savoy Village Board, and he's been in the Rotarians, and he's been a teacher of Park and Recreation at Eastern Illinois University, and he has publications on postcards for most all of the natural areas, the state parks in the country. Well, he had invited in some Joe Pye weed. Well, the Joe Pye weed likes his backyard, and he has a zillion of them, and so if you want to include in your pollinator plot some Joe Pye weed, Bill Smith would be glad to accommodate you with plants that are tough enough that they plant. I have managed to plant a few, and they're doing well. I even planted one in a little prairie we have on the big dig or the detention pond on 2nd Street, which is also doing well. And I suggest you go there to walk around and get some exercise, but notice the prairie. The purple cornflowers are doing well, and other plants are ready to come in. There's 2 or 3 nice little pollinator plots that have purple cornflower and rattlesnake master, and they're beginning to mature as interesting plots. Just north, adjacent to University Avenue, there's a prairie that is a horticultural prairie, so that means it's been designed, and looks a little bit like a garden prairie, and it is doing well too. So visit it. Where's Bill Smith's telephone? He found a little orchid, and yes, there are orchids on that Route 45 corridor. You sometimes find them when you burn the prairie, but they're small, they're inconspicuous, they're not dramatic orchids. So people do watch and enjoy and have backyards which include some of these plants. I would like to say something which is in more serious tone. We do a lot of things where we encounter cultural details, whether it's a Pepsin factory in Monticello or the elevator at Miami, or the prairie is not out there by itself. There are little towns that have their main street that run parallel to what was a railroad line, or run at right angles to the railroad line. So these little details are worthwhile, and they're the sort of thing that tourists like to know about. They like to know that the Pepsin factory was a very typical economic development situation, which is something that's not that common, but it takes a resource, in this case a pepsin enzyme. At the time, people were taking very stringent chemicals, mustard and other things, to quiet a alimentary canal that was in diarrhea or in for constipation. But this pepsin did well, and it's still being produced as Pepto-Bismol. There was a factory, and that factory evolved, and Dr. Caldwell gave birth to most all of the children in Monticello at the time. He didn't really want to take the popularity of this thing into an entrepreneurship, but the Pyatt family provided a house, and this became a product that was sent around the world. So we look at those sort of things. And we've been in Paxton. We've been in Paxton because there's been a high school that was a Royer designed high school and rather fancy, and there was a big debate about whether it should be demolished or not. So we lost it. And, here's a little piece that involves Paxton, and this is Cynthia and Kirby Pringle wrote this, and Cynthia wanted to say that they've been married for 30 years, and this week was their wedding anniversary, and I've gone to a retreat in Golconda, which looks over the Ohio River, and I can imagine them just enjoying that. They do dog art. They dress up their dogs as human facsimiles, and take photographs and prepare books, and they are fun artists. They will follow monarch butterflies or other creatures. So, but Cynthia grew up in Paxton. Her parents separated when she was just 2 years old, and she grew up with her grandma. And she was assistant director of Surface Law, which was above the Hudson drugstore. And so one day, an obviously Mexican person in his 20s came in and talked to Carl Hudson, and Carl thought he was looking for chocolate, but he realized that he was cold and he needed a coat. So Carl gave him $20 and sent him upstairs to the surf store, and Cynthia talked to him, and he didn't have a lot of understanding of English, but he sorted out clothing, and he indicated that the label said it was costly, so he was aware, and he wasn't being pushy or anything. He got clothing and that was warm coat. This was in the middle of winter. It was a very, very chilly time, and he only had a khaki shirt and summer clothes on. So he left. It was Christmas time, so he said, "Merry Christmas," and they exchanged. And then he had asked where the nearest railroad station was, or bus terminal. And Cindy directed him to Rantoul, which is 10 miles away. And he walked the 10 miles. And he got to Ludlow, and he got past Ludlow. He had probably used some of Carl's $20 to buy a bottle of whiskey, and in the next day, someone traveling the 45 found him frozen to death in the cold, and that was so sad, and everyone was very sad. Part of the problem was that he had been arrested in Indiana for car theft, and the car belonged to Paxton, so he was brought back to Paxton. It didn't say whether he was involved in the car theft, but whatever, he was put in jail for several months. So he was cold because he had his court hearing and was released without charge. But he was released with the tires that he had on in summertime. And so the Hudson and Cindy were sad about this. Kirby Kringle was working for the News Gazette as a reporter. He'd obviously gotten information about this situation, and he was talking to Cindy and finding out what the history was. And he did an article that Cindy approved of. So she made a point of going to Champaign to the News Gazette to find Kirby to say thank you for the article. A few weeks later, Kirby called Cindy up for a date. And 6 months later, they were married. And then the 30 years of their marriage together has been the result of someone dying, a young person in their 20s, not an older person. I'll get my notes here. Cynthia found that the Mexican had been buried at home. She tried to write to the parents. She had a translator, and so there are other stories around this. Her translator was riding on a tractor and fell off, and she got run over, and she died. And that was sad too. So, and Sister has a story to tell too. Her parents divorced when she was 2, and she grew up with her grandma. And the parents married independently, and both their spouses died. And 25 years later, the 2 of them got to get back together again. So they were married for a second time I expect it was in Paxton. And that's just another little story. And if you gather some of these stories, you get to be aware of the community. You know where the Hudson Pharmacy is. You know where the thrift store was. You know where Ludlow was. There's a story in Ludlow where the Illinois Central terminated at one stage, and a family came there and got off the train and didn't know how to handle the prairie. So the husband went off looking for champagne or whatever, and it probably was only a banner at the time. And the family actually lost out and died as a result of the difficulties associated just down the road from where Eugenio died. And so those little stories help. We have 9 acres of prairie at the south end of that corridor between Rantoul and Paxton. And the old Route 45, which is hidden in the bushes, goes that 10 miles, and the remnant prairie and regrowth succession prairie that we have at the southern end near the cemetery is part of being a key to encouraging that 10 miles to become a prairie rail trail. So knowing people in Paxton and knowing people in Rantoul and talking to people helps when you may want to, 40 years later, try and do something which is possibly regarded as spectacular, but it's been in the woodwork for many, many years. A little bit like in the Kickapoo Trail, where before we initiated that, we got to know practically every adjacent owner along the bed, plus the people who ran the Kickapoo State Park, and people in Danville, and the Farm Bureau, and the Million County Conservation District, the mayor of Danville, and just gradually getting to know people. So when you come up with a suggestion, it doesn't fall on unexpected ears and become a concern. We're a little bit worried about that with a possible rail trail from Whiteheath to Clinton. But farmers generally have been very, very respectful of what we're trying to do, and there is a skeleton there which may not happen quickly, but its success will depend on knowing people and knowing where they fit into the whole shebang. I'm going to close off and leave some room for some WEFT presentation. We're so lucky to have WEFT and to have the Banner Public television and a Banner Public Library and a Champaign Library, and all those things that help to bring life together. It's just nice to be able to share a street that's blocked off for the virus, and with restauranting on the area. Last night I heard someone say, David, and it was Ian from Rudnick, who's a student in engineering, and we talked and walked around, and he's been on some of my prairies before, but I had gotten hold of 2 Wolfram books because I have a friend who has a son that's committed to computers in the basement, and I just wondered if something as unusual as a Wolfram t-shirt and a couple of Wolfram books might be helpful, but I'm afraid when I started to look at the books were far too sophisticated for the person. Both father and son are into computers, but not with that mathematical detail where Wolfram has an organization that's worldwide, but it's important in Champaign and in Boston, I think. And he teaches people how to engineers especially, how to use mathematics to create the product that they're trying to work with. And so I was able to give those books to Ian, and you might not use them for many years, but they're sort of books that belong to a library. And that sort of casual meeting and just talking to each other is very, very helpful, even though it's in a virus era. So this is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial. And be safe.